Colleagues, it's now 1 Geneva time. So we will very soon launch the event, as we have many people also connecting online, joining us online, and the event is being streamed on social media. Sorry for pressing you. So we are now officially launching this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, good afternoon to who is with us at the International Environment House, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx, so is now watching the video or recording of this event. We have the pleasure to welcome you today for an event organized within the framework of the Geneva Environment Network that will discuss priorities of further work on chemicals and waste issues of concern. This event follows up the resolution on the sound management of chemicals and waste that was adopted at the last session of the United Nations Environmental Assembly. The resolution was tabled by Switzerland and co-sponsored by various member states, including Peru and Thailand, joining us today. Our discussion also builds on existing measures and initiatives and further potential international action. This topic is of particular importance for International Geneva, as many of you know, and many stakeholders from Geneva and beyond are joining us today. Manal, AZZI, team lead on occupational safety and health at the International Labour Organization, will moderate our event today. We thank her to have joined us while the International Labour Conference and the World of Work Summit are still ongoing in Geneva. Before I hand over to Ms. AZZI, and you are formally welcome, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the event will be made available on the webpage of this event, and the link is being shared in the screen or in the chat for who is online. Throughout the event, those of you who are online can raise their questions by using the Q&A box. We have a dedicated session after each of the panel discussions to bring those issues in. Finally, let me also add for those who are online that the transcription is available at the bottom left of your screen, and have a look at the current slide, which shows where to access automated transcript in 100 languages. With that, Manal, over to you.
Thank you so much, Diana. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and to join you on this important discussion and panel. As we know, issues of concern are very much of relevance to all our stakeholders, in particular to populations, those most exposed, such as workers and many others. And being here representing also the International Labour Organization, as global discussions are taking place around the importance of the safety and health of workers in all sectors, is also very timely for us as well. I'm looking forward to fruitful discussions with you, with our distinguished and knowledgeable panelists as well. Let me start by welcoming all our panelists and give the floor first to Michel AGGARWAL-KHAN. She's the Director of the Industry and Economy Division in UNEP. Please go ahead for our opening remarks.
Thank you, Manal. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and it's lovely to see many familiar faces, and thank you for making the time. So as you all know, the UN Environment Assembly, UNEA, put forward a resolution on issues of concern. Well, it was in the broader context of chemicals and waste management, and it asked to look at the priorities, the issues of concern that have been identified in SciChem and from the Global Chemicals Outlook, and to see where we stand today on all of the issues, and where as a broader international community we can address these issues. Just 2 weeks ago, the chemicals and plastics work was launched. A report on chemicals and plastics launched at the Plastics INC meeting in Paris, and actually got a lot of good feedback on the utility of the document and the wealth of information that is there, and will be able to be a foundation also of some of the work that is coming in this process. We saw in BRS some of the chemicals issue, also in plastics, identified some of the additives that have been highlighted as a priority issue to be dealt with. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about issues like chemicals and products. We're talking about endocrine disrupting substances. We're talking about different heavy metals from lead to cadmium. We're talking about microplastics, PFAS, a number of issues that have already got a lot of attention, have already been identified as an issue of priority, but that may need further work to really fully address it. And there are many players out there across our different partners, across governments, who are already addressing these, but further action is needed. And so today's discussion, we are looking forward to hearing your views on what further action, how do these get prioritized, what further work is needed so that we can go back to member states with a proposal on the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila, for that introduction and bringing us up to speed with the issues that we will be discussing today. Next, as we all know, the government of Switzerland with Thailand and Peru proposed the UNEA Resolution 57 on the sound management of chemicals and waste, which was adopted back in March 2022 and requested UNEP to seek the views and on priorities for further work and on potential international action on the issues of concern. We have with us Michel. Welcome. You will share with us an overview of this particular mandate and the pressing need to continue addressing collectively issues of concern at the international level to reduce the impact on human health and the environment. Michel is the Waste and Chemicals Focal Point at the Federal Office for the Environment. Michel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Manal, and good day to all. Thank you very much for having me. On behalf of the government of Switzerland, it's my pleasure also from our side to welcome you to this event on tackling the issues of concern, which is taking place here today in Geneva and online. It is a pleasure to be here, and it's nice to see you all. And thank you, Sheila, for opening remarks showing very well that we have a lot of work on our tables, and also pointing to examples where progress is being made and where opportunities lie to make even more progress. And thanks to the GEN for organizing this event. It is indeed a very good opportunity to engage everyone in this important process to address issues of concern. Thanks, Manal, to be moderating and for the introduction. You have said it, Switzerland, together with Peru and Thailand, did table a draft resolution before UNEA 5 that has led to the resolution on the sound management of chemicals and waste. And that resolution has triggered this consultation process about further action on issues of concern, because there is a need to make progress. And this is all actually based on the UNEP Issues of Concern report that was requested through UNEA 4 already and delivered by UNEP, and which UNEA 5 has welcomed. And we thank UNEP for conducting this consultation process as foreseen in the UNEA 5 resolution. We think it's a very important process to conduct that now. It is an opportunity to prepare for UNEA 5 and other processes ahead. Let's remember that the Issues of Concern report by UNEP has shown that there are many pressing challenges the international community faces and needs to therefore take more action to address them. And for many of those issues of concern, the international governance frameworks are need to be further developed. They are insufficient or not existing, and it is all about action. No, I mean, we need to take action to find the solutions and really address those different issues. There are several SAICM issues, there are several GCO issues. And however, this action is possible if we have an international governance framework that allows stakeholders to take action. And therefore, it's important to further develop the governance elements and complement where necessary. Certainly, the Beyond 2020 instrument to be adopted very soon is a good opportunity to address issues of concerns. Conference of parties of MEAs are important opportunity to address, to make further progress. The development of new treaties are an opportunity, and we know the plastic example. And an effective and efficient way to improve the governments means to build on existing expertise and on existing structures and networks. And here in Geneva, we have a collaboration of institutional actors like UNEP's Geneva branch, the ILO, the WHO, the WTO, the Chemicals and Waste MEAs, SAICM, and other actors. And member states are represented through their missions in Geneva, and that allows for a close collaboration when working on these issues that we know we cannot be solved by one field or sector. And this is the case when it comes to the issues that we have before us and that are analyzed in the UNEP report. In addition to using the existing chemicals and waste governance cluster here in Geneva, it will be important to consider the links between the issues that we want to address. Let's aim at addressing groups of problematic substances and several issues that are interlinked. In fact, the Issues of Concern report shows some of those links between SAICM issues and GCO issues. For example, the SAICM issue of hazardous substances in electronics and the GCO issues, lead, arsenic, and cadmium. And the report also analyzes the existing regulatory frameworks on the different issues, and it concludes that the current action progress that we are making is insufficient, and however that we have opportunities that we can take, in particular if we group the issues and if we expand existing instruments. And from the conclusions of the report, it also comes out, for example, that heavy metals, also mentioned by Sheila, would be an area where such an approach could be taken. Concerted action on arsenic, cadmium, and lead, for example, are needed. And with the Minamata Convention, there is a good model, for example, as it takes in particular into account the life cycle approach. So these are examples where the grouping and the life cycle approach is possible. And so we think that addressing them as a group based on existing and well-functioning governance mechanism is a way forward to consider. And of course, I look very much forward to hearing views on this perspective and also on other opportunities to take action in an integrated and holistic manner by working in particular on those interlinkages and on the grouping of the issues that we have before us. So I wish everyone a very good event here today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Michel, for summarizing that and stating some of the key issues and the key chemicals in question. I move now, we're happy to have with us Jacqueline Alvarez, who's the head of the Chemicals and Health branch at UNEP. We have someone else before. Sorry, Diana. Okay, sure. So we have with us Jacqueline, who's the head of the Chemicals and Health branch, with our colleague also Ludovic Bernaudat, also from UNEP. They will be setting the scene a little bit on the consultation process, which we understand is taking place at the moment, to seek the views on the priorities for further work and further possible international action. Over to you, Ludovic.
Thank you, Manal. And good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Ludovic Bernaudat. I'm the head of the Knowledge and Risk Unit in Jacqueline's team. And we wanted first to present a few background information of why we are here today and the path that took us here. So, as you know, we have developed the Global Chemical Outlook over the years, with the first report published in 2013, which highlighted chemicals intensification. A second report, or an update of the report, was done in 2019 and was publicized and presented at various meetings and conferences, informing UNEA and the international process, considering the strategic approach to the sound management of chemicals and waste beyond 2020. So the GCO also highlights 10 key findings, and we won't go through the key findings today, but generally the conclusions are that while many chemicals are important for sustainable development, as we all know, trends are cause for major concerns. Also, the global goal to minimize adverse impacts on chemicals and waste will not be achieved by 2020. Solutions exist, of course, but more ambitious worldwide action by all stakeholders is urgently needed. Among the key findings, we have the benefits of actions, which are estimated to be in the range of tens of billions of dollars annually. The progress of international treaties and voluntary instrument, however, has been uneven. It's been good, but uneven, and we need to provide some inputs on that. There's a finding was that also significant resource can be saved by sharing knowledge on chemicals management more widely and by enhancing mutual acceptance of approaches in areas ranging from chemicals as assessment to alternative assessment. That's quite important because it brings here international cooperation and sharing of information. And of course, global knowledge gap can be filled, again, through better collaboration. So in UNEA, we had a mandate in UNEA 4 that was given by UNEA to UNEP to follow trends in the design, production, use, and release of chemicals and the generation of waste in order to identify issues of concerns for future editions of the Global Chemical Outlooks and the Global Waste Management Outlook, and catalyze sound management actions. This was followed by a request to prepare a report on matters in which emerging evidence indicates a risk to human health and the environment identified by the strategic approach to international chemicals management, the Global Chemical Outlook, and under the paragraph E above of the same UNEA Resolution 4.8. This report was developed. Sorry, I went ahead. Oh, it's not in the same order. Oh yeah, no, this report was developed actually and led to it was published in September 2020 with the issues of concern from the assessment report that originated from GCO2 and SAICM, and the report reviews our current regulatory and policy framework, address the 19 issues of concerns through specific instruments and actions in Chapter 3 for the priorities on the SAICM, and Chapter 4 for the issues of concern identified by GCO2. For the 11 issues with emerging evidence of risk identified by GCO2, the report further assesses current exposure and provide background information on environment or human health effects of these 11 issues. Sorry for the lighting, it's a bit not very clear on the screen, but I mean, probably cleaner on this one, so it's fine. The reports also find that some of the issues identified by GCO2 have linkages with the issues on the SAICM. I think that was well underlined by the intervention from Switzerland just now. In addition, addressing some of the existing issues of concerns under SAICM can also contribute to the sound management of the issues under GCO2. So there is clear linkage, and that's quite important because it will help us prioritize action, but also probably help us not be too overwhelmed by these 19 issues that are in the end not so independent. At UNEA 5, and that was mentioned again today, the resolution 5.7 requested UNEP to seek views from member states and other stakeholders while ensuring sufficient time for their consideration on priorities for future work, building on existing measures and initiatives and on potential international action on the issues discussed in the assessment report of issues of concern issued in September 2020, and in particular for those issues identified in the report entitled Global Chemical Outlook 2. At the end, we will need to prepare a summary of the analysis, taking into account the views received for consideration and submitted for consideration by the Environment Assembly and by other international bodies, including, of course, the International Conference on Chemicals Management, which will happen in September. So the process, so in April this year, we held an information webinar on these 19 issues of concern, introducing the process. If you are interested, the recording from this initial meeting are available online on the UNEP website. June, where we are now, we issued a few days ago a call for written inputs by stakeholders to gather relevant information and to better understand the next steps that can be taken on issues of concern. This survey is open until the 26th of July. In July, we will organize a global consultation to further exchange views and debate on further work and potential further international action. This will take place here in Geneva on the 11th and 12th of July. And finally, the initial reviews of the survey and the meetings that we've held will be presented at ICCM 5 in September in Bonn. And the drafting of the final report will be take place in the last part of this year for submission to UNEA 6. So as was initiated the discussion today by the intervention from Switzerland, we wanted to repeat the 19 issues of concerns, clearly identifying the linkages between them. The ideas are also, as I mentioned, it's unlikely that we can deal with these 19 issues of concern at the same time at once. We need to find ways to link them together, to prioritize them. Countries might have different priorities depending on their own conditions, but also, most importantly, who are the partners that will help us solve these issues and help us reduce the impact on chemicals and waste on the environment. So thank you very much, and I hope we'll have very interesting discussions during the two panels today.
Thank you so much, Ludovic. That was an excellent overview and a good reminder on the screen of the actual issues of concern. I think we can now hit the panels. We have the first panel to really zoom in on these priority issues and which of them are really critical that we need to be addressing now. The various speakers we have with us will give their perspective and highlight a number of issues, providing their particular view on why these issues are critical and outlining ideas to inspire us for some action at the international level. Let me start by introducing our colleague who's joining us online from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. We have with us the head of division at the Environment Directorate, Bob Diedrich. Hello, how are you? And Bob is here also representing the Interorganization Program for the Sound Management of Chemicals, the IOMC as well. He's an instrumental partner in the field of chemicals and waste. We're happy to hear from you, Bob. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. So I'll start with disappointing you, all of you. by saying that all of these topics are of high priority, simply because they are being addressed or already have been addressed in a number of countries. And as has been mentioned out, a lot has been already been ongoing at the international level, especially on the SAICM emerging policy issues. As you know, the participating organizations of the IOMC are working together to address those issues. For example, the OECD is developing the methods to test for the safety of nanomaterials or to identify endocrine disruptors. Or we are, for example, identifying alternatives to PFAS so that countries can decide for which PFAS adequate alternatives exist so that they can prioritize their risk reduction measures. Michel Sheila just mentioned that we need to develop international governance frameworks. One of the lessons learned from working on the emerging policy issues, the SAICM, is that in the absence of such international governance frameworks, the absolute first priority and the prerequisite for working on these priority chemicals is that countries have chemicals management systems in place to put risk management or to implement risk management measures. For example, you cannot regulate endocrine disruptors or nanomaterials if you don't have the legislative basis to implement risk management measures for chemicals, unless, of course, you have international treaties. But in the absence of those, the absolute first priority is to make sure that all countries around the world have those chemicals management systems in place. For some of the topics, for example, lead, the economic impact of inaction are very well established. And so authorities already now should have everything they need, all the information needed to implement risk reduction measures. So what else can the international community do to help? Again, in the absence of international frameworks or international treaties. First of all, make sure that the post-2020 framework for the sound management of chemicals, so the successor of SAICM, puts a strong emphasis and strong incentives for countries to set up legislative frameworks for the management of industrial and consumer chemicals. This is clearly now in the draft text the case, but once again, in order to be successful, this has to end up in the final text, both in terms as an overall objective as well as in terms of targets. What else can we do? We can share existing national risk assessments for these priority chemicals, so that other countries can reuse them for their own national priorities. It is unlikely that a chemical which is found to be a risk in, for example, in the EU, is not a risk in other countries. So we can reuse existing risk assessments that have been adopted by authorities in some countries for implementation in other countries. And what else can we do? We can continue and expand the work on burden of disease and economic impact of those priority chemicals. That does exist, for example, for lead, which shows that the impact is quite tremendous, but it does not necessarily exist for some of the other compounds in the list. And developing those burden of disease figures, both in terms of actual health effects as well as economic impacts, will really help countries to act on individual chemicals, and it will also incentivize countries to set up their general chemicals management system. The OECD, for example, is currently building some of the tools to better estimate the economic impact of chemicals that are a risk to human health and the environment. On chemicals in products, what we need is an international standard to transmit information on the content of chemicals in articles up and down the supply chain or the value chain, so that users or actors in the supply chain can identify chemicals of concern and make sure they can get rid of them. For some of these chemicals, the exposure pattern has changed over the last few years because of risk reduction measures in a number of countries. For example, for lead, let's say the main exposure has shifted away from lead in paints towards other uses of lead. And so it would make sense to develop updated fact sheets on the most relevant exposure pathways, so that countries can target the most important exposures in their risk management activities. So these are just a few examples of what I believe we can do at the international level to help countries reduce the risks from those priority chemicals and topics. But once again, in the absence of international governance framework or international treaties, the number one priority is to help countries set up their national chemicals management system. Thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob, and for reminding us of the risk management process as an important key element to some of these issues. Without further ado, let me move to our colleague Vuttichai KAEWKRAJANG. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Director of Hazardous Substances Subdivision from Pollution Control Department in Thailand. Thailand, of course, as we mentioned earlier, was a co-sponsor of the UNEA resolution on the sound management of chemicals and waste. Over to you, Vuttichai.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear all. Thank you for giving me the floor. Thailand, like you mentioned, we are one of the co-sponsors of our UNEA resolution on sound management of chemical and waste, for prioritizing issue of concern, like following the information contained in the 2020 UNEP assessment report on issue of concern, chemicals and waste, issue pose risks to human health and environment are critical to address. I would like to share and tell you guys about our work and highlight on the issue of concern. And the chemical in the product is one of we quite concerned, and as well as substances in the life cycle of electronic products. This is another one that we are concerned. Really, for another issue of concern, we do not leave them.
Sorry to interrupt you. Would it be possible to turn the camera on, please?
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. I already turned on. Okay.
Here.
Really for, it's okay?
Not
okay.
yet.
Can you see me? Can you see me?
No.
I don't know. I already turned on the camera, but I don't know how come it cannot.
No worries. Please go ahead.
Okay. Really for another issue of concern, we don't leave them behind. We still keep working along with those two issues that I want to mention. For chemical in products, it is a chemical management issue. We would like to go on with a circular economy, EPR, and PPP, public-private partnership, and polluter pay principle to manage and minimize chemical and waste problem. If you have low and less chemicals in the product, you can move on with material recovery energy recovery, and 3 Rs very easily. Bio-circular green economy BCG model is applied to use for the issue also. Let me introduce BCG model shortly. BCG model is the model that we is a strategy for national development and post-pandemic recovery. BCG models applying science, technology, innovation, and turn Thailand comparative advantage in biological, culture, diversity, and competitive advantage, focusing on 4 strategic sectors: food and agriculture, medical, energy, biochemical, tourism, that you mentioned and I show in the presentation. This make Thailand go on with economy, sociology, and environment. And next, let me talk about waste. Currently, Thailand push ban on municipal waste and 428 types of electronic waste. So we have the officer that take care and like define as a hazardous waste. So on the other hand, the local administrative in Thailand, the organization this is responsible for collect and manage e-waste and recycle and disposal in Thailand. However, mismanagement of e-waste cause a vulnerable problem and effect to human health. Awareness of people on the hazard of e-waste is limited. I think many countries have the same problem, so we need the special law for this one. Also, the plastic scrap. To further enhance the circularity, Thailand has recently announced to prohibit of plastic scrap import starting from January 2025. This shall support the domestic supply in plastic circularity in the term of both quality and quantity using recycling feedstock for domestic plastic industry sector. In line with the National Pollution Management Strategy, Thailand has the second National Waste Management Action Plan from 2022 to 2027, focusing on minimize the risk of hazardous waste in community area and introduce extended producer responsibility system to industry and recycling packaging waste made of plastic, glass, paper, and aluminum, as well as electronic waste also. On the other hand, we also have the second action plan for the plastic waste management. This plan is will cover from 2023 to 2027. That I show you that the emerging issue that we prioritize and concern, and we show you that we have for example, really we have another issue and another thing, but for this time I told you like this before. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for explaining and going through
room and online. And at the beginning of my intervention, I would like to extend my thanks to UNEP and to the authors for preparing this issues of concern assessment report and provided a lot of useful information to inform further discussion and future decision making. And this, I would highly recommend colleagues to read this report, and I would rather not to repeat what's in the report for the sake of time, and I'm not in a position to prejudge the outcome of the consultation process. So rather, I have a few key points and questions to make here in the hope of inspiring more work and thoughts. So why we are talking about issues of concern? If we go back to the UNEA resolution, it's very clear that the expected substantial growth in the use of chemicals and the generation of waste raise a lot of concern. And its linkage and cross-cutting relevance to other environmental and sustainable challenges demonstrate the urgency to address it in a most effective way. So some issues of concerns have been proposed under an assumption that once they are properly addressed, the urgent challenges of chemical and waste and its externalities brought to the broader environmental, social, and economic issues will be addressed accordingly. Is it true? Now I have 3 points to make here. The first one is that we need to bear in mind the development of market, technology, and knowledge are very dynamic. That's why our responses need to be agile, responsive, a living process, and excellent. So I just came back from the INC2 of the plastic treaty negotiation. And one of the topics on board was the microplastics. I saw it's listed on the webpage of this event. But there's also another issue that's under hot debate, which is chemical in plastics. And we know UNEP has prepared a very comprehensive report on it, but it is not listed as one of those 19 issues of concern here. So for this specific issue, what chemicals are there? Where could they be found in products, in material, and in production, in the value chain, and how we evaluate and address and prevent the negative impacts from them is one of the example of missing points here. And I believe the horizon scanning function of the science policy platform under negotiation could provide an important role to respond to this dynamic nature of development and also help to suggest criteria for listing and action of new issues of concern. So this is my first point. And my second point is when we are talking about prioritization is for whom and prioritize on what. So I just came here from another meeting, and at the end of that meeting in the morning, a lot of us are talking about we have like parallel commitments between this event as well as some other events. So people have different choices and decisions about actually it's a prioritization process. Some of us prioritize this event, while others, depending on their personal and national context, they need to prioritize on attending other events. So similarly here, all of those issues listed are at very different stages in terms of knowledge, action, resource, and with geographical differences. For example, my PhD was about research in cadmium toxicity. And our lab have been working on cadmium and a few other heavy metals for a very long time, but we only started to research into nanomaterials and its impacts a couple of years ago. So like for cadmium, we have definitely more knowledge and evidence. But for all of those issues listed here, I believe the scientists can see, although we need more research, but there's already sufficient data for action. When we are talking about action, what do we mean? We mean more research, more money, more reduction, more remediation, or more compensation? So this is an important question. When we talk about action, what do we mean? And that relates to my third and last point, is the action and resource allocation on actions to address all these issues of concern should be guided by the waste hierarchy. But in reality, the resource allocation is kind of follows a reversed waste hierarchy. Such gap is the fundamental reason of a lot of the criticism of greenwashing, the burden shifting, and stock negotiation. We need to bear in mind our social technical system, which governs the flow of material through society, won't be perfect. So this implies that we lose materials for each pass-through, and therefore we should reduce the pace of material flux by extending the use phase, by facilitating a system where the good business model rely on reuse and making products that last longer can be prioritized. In this way, to slow the material loop. And at the same time, we also must avoid these hazardous substances at the first place to facilitate a safe circular economy, to close the loop. So slow and close the material loop, and action and resource allocation should prioritize on upstream, guided by the waste hierarchy. So I had the same impression when I recently working with a group of investors who are interested in chemical and waste issues. They use slightly different languages, but fundamentally, I think we share a lot of the same vision. They talk a lot about the system risk, which is impacts across the whole environmental, economic, and society. They want to emphasize on upstream production and consumption so that we are not shifting the burden, but rather addressing the root causes. And the investors also want binding rather than voluntary requirements. That's why they start to do a lot of more sovereign engagement with countries. So I believe there's a lot of opportunities out there that we can work together. So in summary, we have dynamic nature of development, which requires agile, responsive, and excellent action, and science policy platform can provide it a lot of role in it. The prioritization on what action is issue specific, but in the end, what's needed now, a commitment, ambition, and global action under all existing and planned mechanisms and by all IOMC organizations, member states, and stakeholders in a well-coordinated and orchestrated way. Adopting, for example, the grouping and life cycle approach. Slow and close the material loop, action and resource allocation, prioritize on upstream, guided by the waste hierarchy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. With that, we have heard from all of our three speakers in this first panel. So this panel, as a reminder, was about the prioritization of the issues of concern, which of these we find very critical to address now. But as Melissa said, what is critical and what is more urgent is a matter sometimes of national perspective or other issues in context. It'll be interesting to hear your views. If you have any comments, questions at this stage, maybe we start with the people in the room first, and then we move online. I know we are receiving some questions online that are being addressed. That could be programmatic in nature and being addressed through the chat. I would just remind the colleagues in the room that you don't necessarily, including myself, need to move very close to the microphone when you speak. So happy to receive questions to all our panelists that spoke just now or around the topic of this first panel. Even from the panelists themselves to others. Otherwise, if we don't have questions, we could move to the second panel. Sheila, please go ahead.
So my question is maybe to the OECD, to Bob. Bob, you talked about the need for proper management systems, the need for countries to have the capacity to put in place legislation. Many of the countries we speak to struggle with having the financing for this. How would you see the domestic financing needs to just sustain recurrent costs for basic chemicals management capacity to go into effect?
Yeah, thank you. No, that's an excellent point. It depends how ambitious you want to be, and how much you want to do yourself, and how much you are accepting to rely on what other countries have already done. You can imagine a minimalist system. I mean, the minimum legislative authority that you need to have is to be able to ask for information on chemicals, to be able to do a risk assessment or use the risk assessment of another country, and implement risk management measures for priority chemicals. That is the absolute minimum, let's say, legislative system that you would need to have. With that, you can address the priority chemicals that you have listed, and maybe some of the other more complex issues. In terms of finances, how big has your team to be? Indeed, a team of 5 people can deal with that. So this is not negligible. I agree with you, but I mean, if you go for a minimalist system, it is affordable, and it should be affordable for most countries. Of course, you can go much further and have a really big system, a big agency that churns out risk assessment and risk management measures as much as you want. But as I said, for addressing the list of 10 chemicals that we're seeing here, and even beyond, a minimalist system will be needed. But once again, you need it. Otherwise, for every chemical, you have to go to Parliament, and that's not sustainable.
Thank you, Bob. I hope that answers a little bit the question. We're starting to have a couple of questions online from Lillian Cora to all the panelists that spoke. She's saying that there are problems that are quite global in nature and that need to be addressed globally. How do we make sure that we improve and broaden participation and inform all actors, not just the actors that we know are very much involved? For example, environmental chemical pollutants from pharmaceuticals is one example where we need more people involved and more actors at a more global level. I don't know if any of our panelists have an reaction to this comment. So it's more about some of the issues are very global in nature and require global solutions. How do we get more people involved and more actors involved, not the usual people working on these issues? Giving an example like chemical pollutants from pharmaceuticals, what could be, broader activities and broader people that we need to be involving to react to some of these problems. There's also another question to Melissa that how can one prioritize when everything seems to have different solutions and at different levels depending on national circumstances? What kind of opportunity can we use that is the most efficient in this situation? Melissa.
I would like to give a little bit thoughts on the first question about involving more stakeholders. And I cannot speak on behalf of all stakeholders, but one of my passion and vision is to get more scientists on board. And that's why I have been working on the science policy panel in the past years, because for me and my friends from the university, we have been those working on the chemicals and ecotoxicologists, we get less and less research funding because a lot of that has been flown to biodiversity and climate change, which is good, but at the same time, this is not good in terms of to sustain and secure a next generation of scientists in that. And that's one of the hope I have for the science policy platform, that the platform not only provide the support and the resource for the current generation of scientists, as well as capacity building for them to get better involved into the process, as a process should be science informed, but also to send the signal and the guarantee to the next generation of scientists to make sure there's a group of younger generation who would like to study and contribute in this area as well. And the second question is prioritization. This is something I try to not to touch on because it's a very tricky question, and I really hesitate to say like single out one or a few of those issues to prioritize over the remaining of this list. And that's why I see the science policy platform have such an important role of helping us, maybe not setting, but at least suggesting the criteria for prioritization. And I think this needs collective efforts, not only from scientists, but also policymakers and stakeholders who knows both local context as well as a global concern to contribute and to co-create in this process to make sure we have a global criteria for both listing of chemicals, issues of concern, for prioritizing and prioritizing for actions. So in short, I do not have a very simple, easy answer for this question, but this is my hope that the co-creation could help deliver us and guide us towards a future that no matter which country we are from, no matter which sector we are from, we have a better idea of the guiding principles and criteria how to prioritize our limited resources. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Melissa. We're slowly running out of time before the second panel. We have 3 quick questions left. Maybe one to Bob, following up on Sheila's question. Many countries do have legislation. The problem is really with the implementation, capacity, and oversight. So all chemical management systems worldwide are struggling to address the large number of chemicals already entering the market and the changes in chemical production and uses. Can further implementation of current chemical management systems, especially in lower income countries, address this growth in chemical production and number of chemical produce? That's to you, Bob. It's, not necessarily has a short answer, but it's also a comment of concern, and I'll give you the floor in a second. Just to give you time to think about it, there's a question to Switzerland. Which issues, in your view, must be dealt with globally and now, if you have any particular ideas? And last question, how these subjects are coordinated with other UNEA resolutions, like those related to nitrogen, science policy panel, and other initiatives at UNEA. Maybe that question can be answered by our colleagues from UNEP. So over to you, Bob, for the first question. Thanks.
Okay. Yes, I agree. The continued putting on the market of new chemicals and new types of chemicals like nanomaterials, or now we're interested in advanced materials, are of continuous concern, and countries are struggling with making sure that these new issues are being addressed correctly. But that is true for any type of innovation and in any type of new types of products or any type of safety concerns for new types of products that are being put on the market. What countries are now trying to do more and more is to prevent late surprises, is to adopt a safe by design approach, or push for safe by design approaches through industry, so that those who are putting on the market new products, be it new chemicals or new types of articles or new types of materials, have an approach, a safety approach that starts with research and development, so that from the research and development stage, companies are trying to predict what are potential safety issues with the products, and not only when it comes to the regulatory stage, so that at the end of the day there are no surprises. That means a new regulatory approach. It means also cheap and dirty methods to test for safety very early on for new types of products, and that is work that the OECD is currently doing. Having said that, indeed, any country has to start somewhere, and the list that is in the list of chemicals that we have in front of us is a good place to start. And I would worry about those first, and then start looking beyond. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Very quickly over to Switzerland on the issues, in your view, that need to be dealt with globally now.
Thank you very much for that question. I don't think there can be a very precise answer to that question at this stage. What I can say is that, in my view, the governance structure that we are working on should certainly allow to address issues that have been around for decades and decades and are still there and not resolved. At the same time, that governance structure should also allow to identify and address early on newer issues. That can be, something in the area of nano, or something that is linked to producing, like to designing new products and so on, where there's less knowledge around. Because I think the two elements are needed. You have cost of inaction on of issue related to issues that are still not solved but have been around for a long time, and at the same time we need to take very seriously the prevention aspect, because otherwise we will, history will repeat itself, where we create a problem and then later on spend a lot of energy and money trying to restore systems that could have been left in place in the first instance. So I think both aspects need to be well covered through a governance system, and therefore also think that the science policy panel that was mentioned earlier on by Melissa Wang is very important and will really help also in the aspect of early identification and prevention of new issues. And the aspect mentioned by Bob Dietrich about countries learning from each other because they share assessments and best practice is also something I think that will help to move faster on issues that we have on our list. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. And the question to UNEP from Cecilia Aburto about how all of this is coordinated with other resolutions, like those related to nitrogen and science policy. Jacqueline.
Yes. Thank you very much for the question. Before going to that, I'd like to also mention that the deadline for submissions is 26th July, there was a question in the chat so that everybody gets the dates. How are we coordinating these issues? In reality, in a very strong and what we think strategic manner. So, for example, if you look at the questions for priorities that is part of the survey, or potential solutions or suggestions of other linkages, these resolutions are somehow mentioned in the menu of possibilities and options. On the other way, what we are trying is when putting forward certain elements or discussions with the nitrogen group or the SPP, these elements are in front of them. So they know they are there. They know we are having this consultation. So in a way, what we are really trying is to cross-fertilize the different topics. And also referring maybe to what Melissa was saying on the chemicals in products, on the chemicals in plastics and the reports, this is also an area where we are trying to coordinate to see which of the issues that are or have been already identified by GCO, for example, the phthalates or the BPA, they are additives to plastics. So how are those things interlinked? And the reports that are being produced and the discussions, the webinars, in a way are putting those things together. So that's also something that comes towards you when you are connecting, when you are making your in the case of member states, your positions to the different negotiations that are happening, it's important for you to refer and have a look to the broader picture. We understand the difficulties maybe of reading many things, but in reality, the linkages are there if you look close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Just a couple of points before we move to the second panel. An interesting point from Jargo Wadley. Obviously, the Convention on Biodiversity, the Global Biodiversity Framework's Target 7 mandates, for example, over 50% reduction in risk for both pesticides and highly hazardous chemicals by 2030. Obviously, risk is measured by the combination of use and toxicity. This time-bound and quantified mandate of a UN treaty is 7 years away. So doesn't this make it a clear priority that covers various issues in this discussion, such as highly hazardous pesticides? And this person's asking if the panelists agree that such UN treaty commitments must be reflected in the SciChem beyond 2020 and other chemical-specific instruments. Due to limited time, I think we're not going to go around the table, but it is important that we make linkages, following on what you're saying also, Jacqueline, with other, but also with treaties that already have targets and time-bound requirements that need to fit into with the strategic approach of SciChem beyond 2020. Thank you for that comment. And lastly, from our colleague from the WHO, Leslie, following up on Bob's comment, I assume that in terms of management system compliance and implementation of what we're requiring, it's critical to have mechanisms for surveillance in countries, as many regulatory systems have these challenges with enforcement, obviously. So such systems could include poison centers, for example, and occupational health and safety and consumer safety mechanisms are needed and to be followed. So thank you for that point from the WHO. I move now quickly to the second panel, and this one is focused more on what are the issues of concern that are most actionable, and what could be the most effective way to deal and tackle with these issues at the international level, but also to be able to reduce their impact on human health and the environment. Our first speaker was meant to be Her Excellency, the Ambassador Romy Sonia, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Peru, who is unable to join us as she's currently tied up at the International Labour Organization World of Work Summit. But we're happy to have with us her counselor, Counselor of the Minister, Mr. Bernardo ROCA-REY, who will present us the point of view from Peru. Thank you for joining us. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you also to all the panelists for joining your voices to this timely and important event. Special thanks also to the Geneva Environment Network and UNEP for convening us and providing us for an opportunity to contribute to the consultation process mandated by UNEA Resolution 5/7. For Peru, it's very important to gather different actors to deliberate on existing initiatives that can be galvanized and deepened to generate broader and more effective international action. As we all know, new chemicals continue to be developed, the demand and production of chemicals continues to grow, pollution continues to increase, and new pollutants continue to be uncovered, while pollution pathways become increasingly complex and intertwined. With this in mind, Peru is deeply committed to tackling these challenges and is engaging in different international processes in this regard. For example, Peru submitted at the last United Nations Environmental Assembly in Nairobi, together with Rwanda and important number of countries, the resolution 5/14 that launches the negotiation process of an international instrument to end plastic pollution. And currently, the Peruvian ambassador Gustavo Mesa Cuadra is chairing the bureau of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee. Additionally, Peru also co-sponsored the UNEA resolution 5/7 and 5/8, led by Switzerland and other countries on the sound management of chemicals and waste, as well as the establishment of a science policy panel. We are very active in the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions, as well as the SAICM Beyond 2020 process. And most recently, Peru presented a resolution with a group of countries on the impact of chemicals, waste, and pollution on human health, that was adopted by the last 76th World Health Assembly a few days ago. For Peru, the issue of chemical pollution is transversal and a cross-cutting issue. That's why let me focus for a moment on the plastic treaty process, take into account that the second round of negotiation just finished a few days ago. Among the 19 issues of concern raised by the assessment report, you have, for example, microplastics. You have phthalates, which are also found in plastics. You have bisphenol, which are used in plastic production and are also can be carried by marine plastic debris. We have recent studies that shows that more than 13,000 chemicals are associated with the production of plastics, and over 3,200 out of 7,000 analyzed have hazardous properties of concern. In that sense, we firmly believe that the value of tackling this issue, such as in the framework of the future plastic treaty, is not only environmental. In addition of curbing plastic pollution by plastics, the plastic treaty is also of great value as a tool in managing the harmful chemical components of plastics and the health impacts that they may have on society. The plastic treaty should include, for example, a mechanism to regulate those chemicals of concern by through a negative and positive approach for listing chemicals, as well as chemical simplification. It is also important to further develop information on the linkages between plastic pollution and the chemical components of plastics and their impact on human health. There is a lack of information nowadays on the human health and environmental health consequences of the chemicals used in plastic, especially when the plastic product is improperly disposed or otherwise results in pollution. We have all heard recent studies that shows that we can find microplastics in our bloodstream, but there is still not clear studies to show how this is impacting our health. But I'm sure the impact will not be very positive. So this is further research is needed to really have a broader knowledge of the real impact of those issues. That's why also a group of countries, including Peru, we promoted the resolution on the impacts of chemical waste and pollution in the last World Health Assembly, which objective is to increase the scientific knowledge on the human health impacts of chemicals, including microplastics, as well as to strengthen the linkages between the World Health Organization and the diverse platforms that address chemicals and waste pollution, such as the UNEP Science Policy Panel, which is right now in negotiations, the strategic approach to international chemicals management, SAICM, the negotiations of the plastic treaty, among others. So the time is ripe to address this issue. We are negotiating the future plastic treaty, we are negotiating the SAICM Beyond 2020 process, the ongoing work to establish a science policy panel, the recent inclusion of 2 chemicals used in plastics in the Stockholm Convention POP list, for example, or the adoption of the resolution I just mentioned in the World Health Assembly. All these processes and landmark achievements in a very short time increase awareness and fuel the growing appetite to effectively address the harmful implications of chemical waste and pollution from a human health and environment approach. So we must capitalize the available political will and the momentum we are having right now and that we are seeing in different international fora to address the challenges posed by chemical and waste as one of the defining issues of our times. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bernardo. This is really informative, and thank you for your commitment and passion from Peru to this issue and the points that you raised. I'd like to move to our second speaker. We're very happy to be joined by Mr. Juergen HELBIG from the International Chemical Policy Coordinator, the DG Environment from the European Commission, joining us online to discuss a little bit about the actionable issues of concern from the perspectives of the EU. Mr. Juergen, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Manal, and good afternoon, colleagues, and thanks a lot for inviting me to this meeting, and I'm happy to share some views on the topic that is at stake today, the issues of concern. You circulated in your information notes the list of the 19 issues of concern that have already been identified and that are now circulating. And when I look at this list, and I realize that it includes some issues that have already been on the agenda for many, many years, but they are still of high relevance for many countries since the necessary action at national level is lacking or is insufficient. So from my perspective, the big question is why? And there is certainly a number of factors that play a role in this context, but the political interest and political will at national level are certainly key. They are key in order to first establish the regulatory framework that is necessary at national level, and it has been mentioned by Bob in particular, who explained the importance of the regulatory framework to take action. In addition, when a country has the political and will and the necessary regulatory framework, the second and also very important element is then to make available the necessary resources for the implementation of that regulatory framework, which has also been mentioned by a colleague today. So these two factors are really key, and whatever work is done at international level, and which is certainly very useful, but this then has to be then also implemented at national level in order to really make progress. Under the current situation and in the absence of a legally binding instrument at international level, the next and very important step at international level is certainly to agree on an ambitious framework on sound management of chemicals and waste that we are currently negotiating and that will hopefully be concluded in Bonn in September this year. Since this framework is the future platform for addressing issues of concern. So the design of this framework, the level of ambition that is put into this framework, this is as a key factor. And this is where we all are really needed and are required to act now and in order to get an ambitious outcome. So this is for me the first action point for all of us on our agenda. And then now going beyond this framework and coming back to the question of why at national level there's still so much to be done. And how can this be supported by international work? I have also some points that I would like to raise. One point is certainly for the international level to still check whether there are still some information gaps that may be important for countries. Colleagues have mentioned that there is already so many information available, and I would fully agree. It is sufficient to take action, but still, since so many countries are still lacking the action, there might still be some information gaps, and therefore it might be worthwhile to check whether those gaps still exist and then how to address them in order to help countries. In addition, A second point is the access to the existing information, which might also be a challenge for many countries. And then a third point is then also the guidance on how to use the available information at national level, because and it has been mentioned, countries can simply draw from the work that is done by other countries, in particular when looking at the globally harmonized system for classification and labeling. But still, it needs to be transferred to the national level, and it needs to be then implemented into the national law. So these are very important points in my view, and a lot of this work has already been done, and a very good example of how this has been addressed in the past and is certainly the IOMC toolbox, which is very instrumental in this regard, since it provides a very good basis for looking for information and getting the necessary guidance. Turning now in a few words to the issues that have been mentioned on the list. From my perspective, clearly the most important and the most actionable is lead, because lead is known for its very dramatic impact on human health, and in particular, a new World Bank study shows that the impact of lead exposure on the global costs for health is now estimated to be 4.6% of global GDP. So it is dramatic, and therefore, as you may know, the G7 have initiated another action to address lead from the G7 perspective. Last year, a workshop was held in November in order to discuss with the global community, including all stakeholders, what can be done in order to improve the situation, including in particular from the G7, and this initiative will continue. But it is also clear that in addition to the international work that will be done by G7 and hopefully also done by others, and we also see certainly the new framework as a platform to continue addressing lead, not only lead in paint, but lead in general, since we know that there's a lot of other exposure routes that are equally important. So this is certainly something to be very high on the agenda for all of us, and certainly also for the national level. A second is then the PFAS, and we all know also the problems that arise from the use of PFAS, these very broad uses of PFAS, and the presence now in the environment and the high persistence. So therefore, in the European Union, we decided to take very broad action and to restrict all uses, and only then still allow those uses that are really key for the society. And we will also address PFAS contamination in all the environmental matrices in order to address this really in a very broad manner. And we certainly invite all countries to also draw from our knowledge and experience and act on PFAS. And again, the framework could be a platform to address this work. And then the third point, and my last, is the endocrine disruptors. And here we adopted in the European Union new hazard classes for endocrine disruptors, and we intend to propose those hazard classes also to the UN GHS system, and we hope that there will be an agreement to take them on board, and then all countries can benefit from this international work done under the UN in order to protect their people and also the environment from endocrine disruptors. So here also an action point for all of us to first support the discussions at the UN level in order to include the new hazard classes in the GHS system, and then second, take action at national level to implement. So these are the points that I would like to bring to your attention. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Juergen. This is really important to hear, and some of these actionable priorities and the way the EU is giving insight and creating ambition around solutions to be found for these particular issues of concern. I turn now to Ms. KAEWKRAJANG WOODALL. Thanks for joining us here. We're particularly interested in your views, especially from the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention. Ms. WOODALL is the Senior Program Management Officer at the BRS Convention Secretariat. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting us to taking part as a panel in this event. And thanks to Jen for organizing this event. I've been listening to interventions from the panel with a high interest. And I was also thinking, what's the priority? And I personally was very happy to see the adoption of the resolution at WHA on chemicals and waste and pollution impact, as I think health is a high priority. Earlier this year, when my daughter had to be hospitalized, that became my top priority. I stopped going to work. I was even not eating for myself. Really, I think health is important. Health of yourself, your family, your community, and global health, right? And so I think that health issue is bringing us together to prioritize those issues. We have seen the 19 list. By the way, I think they could be grouped, and I counted maybe about 10. They could be all addressed around prioritizing, addressing health impacts. And also this WHA resolution had this call for the Director General to develop chemicals assessment report, the report to assess the impact on chemicals and waste and so on. I think BRS would also be quite interesting in getting involved with UNEP chemicals as well in such effort. Another one on the updating of EDC report. I think this is also excellent that WHO would be taking this work, as well as the capacity building work. I read in the WHO resolution that national assessment, at the national level, those assessment of chemicals and waste impact on health. I think this would be excellent if WHO is fully on board, and from the UNEP side as well, we could really contribute to this work. And I was really interestingly hearing the intervention by Bob about in absence of international treaty, that then at the national level, countries should work to establish chemicals management system. This is very interesting comment, because we do have international treaties that we can already work on. And that also somebody raised the issue of implementation. So establishing chemicals management system at the national level is the implementation of international treaties that are already available. So if each country or parties or even non-parties try to fully implement Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm, and Minamata conventions, I think many of those issues of concern are actionable. So for example, Stockholm Convention lists like 34 chemicals or groups of chemicals, and many of them are EDCs. Right, and so for those, of course, there are chemicals that are not yet listed or never going to be listed under the Stockholm Convention. But by trying to tackle those chemicals issue at the national level, the countries would need to work on establishing chemicals management system. So BRS and Minamata conventions, those conventions are opportunity. The INC process is an opportunity for actionable point, tackling microplastics or emerging contaminants. Science policy, Manal, is also a great opportunity, as mentioned already by Melissa. ICCM5 is another great opportunity, like Juergen just mentioned. So the point I wanted to make is that you don't address only household waste management. You don't address just plastic waste management, because they are waste management issue. By trying to tackle plastic waste management, you would also tackle household waste management. You don't address polychlorinated naphthalene from unintentional releases. You try to address dioxins and furan release by applying best available technique and best environmental practices. You would tackle all the unintentionally released toxic chemicals, right? So I would think that all those listed as an issue of concern are very important, but try not to address those issues as one issue, like phthalates or BPA, but then those issues could be tackled together by looking at it in a holistic way, making use of existing mechanisms like BRS and Minamata conventions. And I think if you want to make progress as soon as possible, this is the one shortcut. And my final point I wanted to make, which I already said in a WTO forum, is that multilateralism in this place is very important. Like INC, Science Policy Panel, ICCM5, PRS. This really, you really need, in order to tackle environmental issues, it's the only way to solve this is to work together, cooperatively, and then taking shared responsibility, not shared interest, but shared responsibility towards protecting human health and the environment for just only our generation, but for generations to come. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Kay. That's very inspiring, and I hope your daughter is better. So we have run out of time. Obviously, we are receiving some questions online, which our team will try to address. Before we move to the closing session, if there are any burning questions from the room, please go ahead and ask us now. Okay, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Sorry, before the question, we have with us online, Mr. Ahmad ANSARI is the Partnerships Director from the Zero Discharge of Hazardous Chemicals. We're happy to hear from you on the priorities that are actionable, especially from the sector of the economy, such as textile, and how we can operate more safely and sustainably in such a potentially hazardous sector such as textile. Mr. ANSARI, please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, UNEP, and thank you, Geneva Environment Network, for giving a place to speak a little bit about the sector specific. I think what is really important is, when we see this issue of concern, even if we are speaking about the 19, they basically come quite across with the different sector, even if I think there are some issues which are sector specific. What is really important is that it is not just the issue of concern, but it is also the issue of, let's say, approach and methodology, how to really tackle, such kind of a list, and also other, let's say, the substances. So we, ZDHC, how we basically have really gone for a different approach. And this is where I would just like to share a couple of the experience we have been doing in the last many years to tackle all these harmful, hazardous, let's say, the issue of concern. The approach basically has been that majority of the global corporate, they have been managing these issue of concern by looking the things somewhere in the end of the product. And this is basically the end of the product goes for the solution only for the consumer's perspective. And this is where, we came up with an approach, which is what we call begin of pipe approach. means looking and identifying these issue of concern right at the beginning in the manufacturing, and then creating a kind of a safer alternative with the engagement with the chemical industry together. So I think this is where important part, what approach we are taking to tackle this issue of concern is basically going with the MRSL approach, that is the manufacturing restricted substances, right at the beginning in the manufacturing part. So this is where, you know, I think we are all speaking within SAICM and IOMC approach about a kind of, you know, the life cycle approach. And this is where I think it is important that the life cycle approach is really giving an opportunity to go across the boundaries. This is what we are calling about as an international framework. So this is the one important part. The second important part is the multi-stakeholder engagement is very important. How basically the approach and methodology that you are incorporating the corporate world, the brands and the retailers and the manufacturers globally using the chemicals and the chemical industry playing an important part. So this is a kind of a multi-stakeholder approach where each individual stakeholder has been having their own accountability and responsibility. So the chemical manufacturers globally are manufacturing the safer alternatives, and the manufacturers, those who are manufacturing the product, they are using the safer alternatives. And at the same time, this is also creating an important for the requirements of the brands and the retailers. So the multi-stakeholder engagement is extremely important, and also having the accountability. And this is where I think within ZDHC, we are also seeing that the regulation and the national government's role in somehow bringing the policy as an important component part is. The third element is really important, is that each individual stakeholder is looking this chemical management not only from the human and health perspective, but also as an opportunity for the business case. This is where we ZDHC, we did last year a kind of an, if we are managing the sustainable chemical management in a proper way, that is also creating a kind of a business case. So that's basically is a good drive to go for, let's say, creating a good environment for the life, for the water, for the land, and also for the life, which is basically workers and the consumers at the same time. So this is where I just wanted to share our experience with the textile, footwear, leather and apparel sector. And this is where we have been engaging from the last more than 7 and 8 years. And there are solutions, there are proper approach, which basically is bringing all these issue of concerns into an actionable item. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmad. Sorry for missing you earlier.
No problem.
And thanks for bringing out that perspective from the real world and the real sector, and proposing real solutions to some of these issues. As I was saying, the questions we're getting online, we're happy to receive them and deal with them as we move forward. We still have the closing session, but I'm happy to take a couple of questions from the floor in the room. I had seen the hand raised from India. If you still wish to take the floor before we move to closing, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Preeti, and it's an open question. So, pollution due to microplastics are increasing drastically today, which are considered to be one of the contemporary and major environmental hazards leading to several diseases such as cancer and other chronic diseases, also affecting the aquatic species and most importantly soil contamination. Will there be a feasible global solution to this problem before it's too late? Thank you.
That's a very big question for last minute. I don't know if colleagues, yes, Sheila.
So as you know, the Global Plastics Agreement is being negotiated. They met 2 weeks ago, and in fact, a very big resounding message from many stakeholders was the need to look all the way upstream to seeing how to reduce the size of the problem. So reduce the amount of plastics that are in the first place that are unnecessary, short-lived, not just single use, but short-lived plastics, to look at the way we package goods. You know, we carry so much diluted with lots of water, head space, using package that, you know, maybe you'll use the product for a month and then it, you know, so while countries have put in place single-use plastic bag bans, there's lots of other short-lived plastics. So the first resounding message from the plastics negotiations was, how can you reduce the size of the problem? Secondly, then to substitute with other materials that don't have an environment footprint, and then to look at reuse and refill systems, so that we're not having to have microplastics that are ending up in the oceans and in other water bodies, because otherwise we're just, you know, trying to mop up the problem when actually the solutions have to come from upstream.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question and for informative answer. With that, I think we'll move to the closing session. I want to first thank our distinguished panelists, and I'd like to invite Mr. John Roberts, who's currently the senior consultant for UNEP, and we would like to hear from you.
Hello. Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Manal, and thank you for the opportunity to add some comments. As the time is short, I'll be quite brief, but just to say that I'm a consultant and I'm working with UNEP to help prepare the analysis commissioned by UNEA 5 on the further work that countries and stakeholders think should be undertaken on the issues of concern. It's clear from the comments that have been made that we've come a very long way over recent years. We've set up the conventions, we have SciChem, and we've done work in UNEP. And the conventions have been dynamic. They've been able to expand to deal with new priorities. But the assessment report that was prepared for the last meeting of UNEA demonstrated that for the issues that had previously been identified in the global chemical outlook or by the SciChem process, the action has fallen short of what's been necessary, and hence the mandate to prepare a report for UNEA 6 to consider. And the excellent contributions we've had from the panelists today are a very good start in the process of preparing that report, and I'm grateful to all of them for what they've said. It's clear that we have a big opportunity coming forward with the plastics treaty being negotiated, with the science policy panel being established, and with ICCM 5 due to prepare the new SciChem framework and agree that later this year. So there are big opportunities to step up the way in which we can respond to these issues and find means of dealing with them. And as one of the panelists said, this is one of the defining issues of our time. A number of very important points have been made. Bob emphasised the importance of national capacity and the need to have systems in place at the national level. Others have stressed the need for international action on a number of these topics. The importance of circularity and the need to reduce the amount of hazardous chemicals in products if we are ever to move to a circular and zero waste economy. We need to be agile in our responses, and we need to find practical ways of going forward in terms of grouping the chemicals and finding the right approaches, working not only within UNEP, but with other partners, WHO, ILO, and the others within the UN framework. This is the start of the process of preparing the analysis report. There will be a 2-day consultation in Geneva next month when we'll be able to go deeper into some of these issues. But the main mechanism for countries and stakeholders to become engaged is through the written consultation, which has just been launched and will provide us with the fullest and most detailed information about the full range of views in the most comprehensive way. The invitations to take part in that consultation have gone out to focal points for UNEP, for SciChem, and for the conventions. So countries and stakeholders should have received that. If there are any questions about that, then please do contact UNEP to register interest. And the closing date for those comments is the 26th of September. But I hope everyone who's been online and in the room will have found this a useful opportunity to understand the issues much better, so that they can come to the UNEA 6 discussion with a good basis for finding a way forward on addressing these issues, some of which we know are long-standing, others are more recent, but all of them do require action if we are going to deal with the challenge of sound management of chemicals, which is so vital to dealing with all three of the planetary crises that we're currently seeking to address. So thank you very much to everyone who's participated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for that brief and quick and efficient summary. Sheila, over to you for the final remarks.
Thank you, and thank you, John. It was really a good discussion to listen to the different speakers talking about the different alternatives that exist, to hear about how some chemicals are being phased out, which will, of course, spur a market for a more sustainable alternative. And then to hear also that maybe in parallel, we need a process that looks at how do you deal with the very big number of chemicals instead of one by one, looking at them in a cluster, maybe by sector, so that it looks at the full value chain of all the actors in the value chain who are engaged to seeing how to deal with the harmful chemicals that might be used in that sector. What was also interesting for me to listen to was how, at the end of the day, in addition to tackling the 19 chemicals in the different lists, was also to have basic chemicals management capacities in place, and that needs to be financed domestically. We heard how in Thailand, EPR is an interesting tool for circular economy approaches, but could also be maybe a tool that could help fund some of the basic systems while taking advantage of risk management, risk assessments that are done, for example, in the EU, that could be used by other countries. So very interesting space to see how this analysis will further develop as we go towards the UN Environment Assembly. And I hope all of you will continue to engage. So thank you very much.
So thank you all. I think there was just a precision for the deadline for consultation is 26 July, not 26 September. Thank you all for joining us. The meeting's adjourned. Bye.